They said it was just for one night, but they locked the door from the outside. I am 72 years old, and I know the sound of a real lock. Not the polite click of a latch, but the heavy turn of a key, the pause, the certainty. When I heard it, something inside me went very still. Not frightened. Not yet. Just clear. People do not lock you in for your own good unless they plan to keep you there. The room was small and too clean, like a place meant for people who were supposed to forget themselves. White walls, a narrow bed bolted to the floor, a window that didn't open more than an inch. No clock. They take clocks first. Time is harder to hold when you can't see it passing. I sat on the edge of the bed, with my hands folded in my lap, the way I used to sit in the doctor's office when my children were young and restless, and I was trying not to show how tired I was. My coat lay on the chair, where they had placed it for me, neatly, as if courtesy could soften anything. Inside the coat pocket were my house keys. I could feel their weight even from across the room, like a reminder that something still belonged to me. They told me my daughter signed the papers. They told me the lawyer would come in the morning. They told me this place was temporary, that it was for assessment. I have lived long enough to know that words like that mean someone has already decided. I walked to the window and looked down at the parking lot. Evening was settling in, the slow kind, the kind that makes shadows longer than they should be. I thought of my house then, the blue one with the narrow porch and the apple tree that never gave much fruit, but bloomed like it was trying to prove something. I planted that tree with my husband 40 years ago. He dug the hole. I held the sapling straight. We argued about how deep it should be. We always argued about small things. We stayed married because of the large ones. If you enjoy the stories here, dear, you're welcome to join our Patreon. There you'll find exclusive tales that never appear on YouTube, and new stories come out earlier than anywhere else. The link is just below. We're waiting for you. There was a knock at the door. Not asking. Announcing. A guard opened it just enough to look inside. He was young, maybe 30, with the posture of someone trained to stand between things rather than belong to them. His badge was clipped too high on his chest. He avoided my eyes at first, reciting something he had clearly memorized. "Dinner will be brought later," he said. "If you need anything, press the button." I nodded. I didn't thank him. Gratitude is often mistaken for agreement. As he turned to leave, his gaze dropped, just for a moment, to my left hand. I hadn't taken my rings off. I never do. My wedding band is thin now from years of wear, and beside it, the signet ring my father gave me when I turned 21. Gold, worn smooth, engraved on the inside with initials no one ever bothers to read. The guard stopped. He looked again, more carefully this time. His face changed, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. People think old women miss things. We don't. We simply don't comment. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if the walls themselves had ears. "You're not staying," he whispered. For a second, I wondered if I had imagined it. Then he straightened, cleared his throat, and stepped back into his role. The door closed. The lock turned. I stood there for a long time, my hand still lifted, my fingers resting lightly against the ring as if it had spoken instead of him. I did not know yet what he had seen or why it mattered. I only knew this. Someone, somewhere in this building, had looked at me and seen more than a room to be filled and a house to be taken. And I have learned, over many years, that this is often how things begin. Not with shouting, not with rescue, but with one quiet moment where the story shifts and only the patient notice it. By morning, the room smelled faintly of disinfectant and toast. They slid the tray through a narrow opening near the door, like feeding an animal that might bite. 2 slices of white bread, 1 boiled egg already cooling, tea in a paper cup that tasted of cardboard. I ate slowly, not because I was hungry, but because routine has weight. It reminds you that you still exist. There was still no clock. I measured time by sounds instead. Footsteps in the corridor, a cart rattling past, a door opening somewhere down the hall, then closing again. I noticed how often people avoided looking directly at my door. That, too, told me something. I washed my hands in the small sink and studied myself in the mirror above it. The lighting was unforgiving, but I didn't turn away. 72 leaves its marks plainly. The face looking back at me was thinner than it used to be, the jaw more decided, the eyes quieter. Not weak, just finished with explanations. I straightened my cardigan and sat back on the bed. The ring felt heavier than usual that morning, or maybe I was simply more aware of it. I turned it once, the habit I have when I need to think. My father taught me that habit without meaning to. He used to do the same with his watch when he was deciding something that could not be undone. They came for me an hour later. 2 people this time. A woman with a clipboard and a man in a suit who smiled too quickly, the kind of smile meant to calm livestock. "Good morning," the woman said brightly. "We just need to go over a few things." She spoke as if we were partners in this, as if I had chosen the room, the lock, the missing clock. I did not interrupt her. People reveal more when you let them talk. They listed concerns, my age, my living alone, a fall I had last winter that I recovered from without their help. They used the word risk several times, as if repeating it might turn it into truth. The man in the suit placed a folder on the small table. I did not open it. "My house is paid for," I said calmly. "My accounts are in order. I am not confused." The woman smiled again, thinner now. "Of course, this is just a formality." Formalities are where lives get rearranged. When they left, the door locked behind them once more. I stayed seated, hands folded, breathing even. Panic would have been a waste of energy. Anger, too. Those things are loud. I needed to be precise. Later, the same guard returned. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, pretending to check something on the wall. When he finally looked at me, it was direct this time. "They'll come again this afternoon," he said quietly, "with more paperwork." I nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added almost reluctantly, "Don't sign anything." That was all. He left before I could ask a question. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. I thought of the apple tree again, of how shallow roots make trees easy to pull out. Mine were not shallow. They had mistaken my silence for softness. Many people do. I closed my eyes, not to rest, but to gather myself. Whatever they planned to do next, I would be awake for it. They returned in the afternoon, just as the guard said they would. This time the lawyer came with them. I recognized the type at once. Gray suit, careful shoes, voice trained to sound reasonable even when it wasn't. He did not introduce himself as my lawyer. That mattered. He belonged to someone else. They did not sit. They stood around the small table, leaving me on the bed like an exhibit. The woman from the morning smiled again, as if smiles were her uniform. The lawyer opened his folder and spoke gently, the way people do when they want to sound kind while taking something. He talked about capacity, about concern, about how hard it is for families when parents refuse help. He said my name often, as if repeating it might soften me. I let him finish. When he slid the papers toward me, I did not touch them. "You've already made arrangements," he said. "This just makes it official." "I don't recall agreeing to anything," I replied. The woman shifted her weight. "Your daughter was very clear." "My daughter." They liked that phrase. It made everything sound settled. I asked one question only. "Where is the original copy of my deed?" The lawyer blinked. Just once. Enough. "We can discuss property later," he said. "Right now, this is about your well-being." People say that when they want you to stop asking questions. I stood up then. Slowly, carefully, not giving them anything they could label as instability. "I am not tall, but age has a way of adding presence if you let it." I looked at each of them in turn. "I am not signing," I said. "And I would like my phone." The room went quiet. The woman glanced at the lawyer. The lawyer glanced at the door. "We'll step out," he said. "Give you time." They took the folder with them. That mattered too. The door locked again. I sat back down and waited, listening to my breathing until it slowed. My hand rested on my knee, fingers touching the ring without thinking. I felt steadier than I had all day. Saying no does that. It reminds the body who it belongs to. A while later, the guard came back. Alone. He didn't pretend this time. He closed the door behind him and stood where no camera could see him clearly. His eyes went to my hand again, then to my face. "My grandfather had one like that," he said quietly. "Same mark inside." I said nothing. I let him talk. "He lost his house to paperwork," the guard continued. "Didn't understand it until it was too late." He met my gaze. "Yours is still yours." That was not a promise. It was a warning, and I understood it. "Thank you," I said. He nodded once and left. When the lock turned again, I didn't flinch. I had learned something important that day. They were in a hurry, and people in a hurry make mistakes. By the second evening, I understood the rhythm of the place. They were polite in shifts, concerned in the mornings, distant in the afternoons, brisk at night. Kindness here was scheduled, like medication. It came when it was convenient for them. No one mentioned my phone again. I asked once calmly, while the woman with the clipboard was checking boxes she had already decided to check. She didn't look up when she answered. "It's being held for safekeeping." Safekeeping. Another word that meant removal. When she left, I stood at the door and pressed my ear against it. I could hear voices farther down the hall, a television murmuring, someone laughing. Life continuing where I wasn't allowed to reach it. That, more than the lock, made my chest feel tight. I sat back down and forced myself to think. Not about escape. Not about shouting or demanding. About leverage. At my age, you don't win by force. You win by knowing what other people need to keep hidden. That night, they brought a different dinner, better food, real cutlery, a sign. Someone had decided it was time to soften me up. I ate a few bites and pushed the tray aside. When the guard came to collect it, I looked up at him. "You grew up nearby," I said. He paused. "How do you know?" "Your accent changes when you're tired," I replied. "And you don't talk like the others." He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Then you know this building used to be offices," I continued. "Not a care facility." He looked at me more sharply now. "They renovated," he said carefully. "Quickly," I agreed. "Too quickly to fix everything." Silence stretched between us. He didn't deny it. "You don't have to answer," I said. "But if there's a fire alarm test, do the doors unlock automatically?" His jaw tightened. That was answer enough. He left without another word. That night, sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of my house, of light moving across the kitchen floor in the late afternoon, of dust floating like something alive. I woke with my heart steady and my mind clearer than it had been in days. In the morning, the lawyer returned alone. He brought fewer papers this time. Another sign. "We can do this the easy way," he said, sitting across from me as if we were equals now. "I'm sure you believe that," I replied. He leaned forward. "Your daughter is worried. She doesn't want this to become unpleasant." I smiled then. "Just slightly." "It already has," I said. "For her." His expression flickered. There it was again, that tiny crack. "You should be careful," he warned. "People can misunderstand situations like this." "So can courts," I answered. He left shortly after. I stood by the window once more, watching the light fade. I touched my ring, feeling the familiar groove on the inside. It had been there longer than this building, longer than these people and their folders and their smiles. They thought they had time. They didn't know I had been preparing for this kind of moment my entire life, without ever meaning to. The fifth morning began without ceremony, which in that place meant something was coming. No clipboard, no lawyer, no rehearsed concern, just silence stretching longer than usual. Even the cart did not come by at the expected hour. I counted my breaths, then my steps, pacing the narrow space until the shape of the room felt carved into my feet. When the door finally opened, it was not the woman or the man in the suit. It was the guard. He did not stand in the doorway this time. He stepped fully inside and closed the door behind him, though he did not lock it. That detail mattered. I noticed it immediately and said nothing. "You should be ready," he said quietly. "For what?" I asked. "For them to push harder?" I nodded. "That usually means they're afraid." He looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth I could carry. "People underestimate us at this age. They think we are fragile vessels. They forget we have been holding grief, responsibility, and silence for decades." "They're trying to move things through before the end of the month," he said. "Paperwork, transfers. Once it's done, it's hard to reverse." "Hard is not the same as impossible," I replied. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. He glanced up toward the ceiling, then back at me. "Your ring," he said. "Where did it come from?" "My father," I answered. "He wore it before me." He swallowed. "May I?" I held my hand out, slowly, deliberately. He did not touch me, only leaned close enough to read the engraving inside. The color drained from his face. "That name," he said under his breath. He was known. I did not ask how. I already understood. Some names do not disappear. They settle into places quietly, waiting. "My grandfather worked for him," the guard continued. "Said he was the kind of man who never forgot a promise." I met his eyes. Neither was my father. Silence filled the room again, but it was different now, charged, focused. "They don't know," he said. "About that, about who you are." "No," I agreed. "They don't." Footsteps echoed down the corridor. He straightened instantly, stepping away as the sound grew closer. Before he reached the door, he turned back. "There's a fire inspection this afternoon," he said, his voice once again neutral, professional. "All internal doors have to be unlocked for a short time." I inclined my head. "Thank you." He left. This time the door did not lock. I did not move. Not right away. People make mistakes when they expect panic. I waited, listening, counting heartbeats until the building settled into its usual hum. Then I stood and slipped my coat on. The keys were still in the pocket. I did not try the door yet. I walked to the mirror instead and looked at myself carefully. I saw a woman with gray hair and steady eyes. A woman who had signed mortgages, buried a husband, raised a child, and kept a home standing through years of quiet endurance. I saw someone who knew how systems worked because she had lived inside them without ever belonging to them. When I finally touched the handle, it turned easily. The corridor outside was empty. I stepped out and closed the door behind me, gently, as if I were the one granting permission now. The hallway smelled different from the room, less disinfectant, more dust and old paint. Buildings keep memories even when people pretend they don't. I walked slowly, not because I was afraid of being seen, but because speed draws attention. At 72, no one questions a careful pace. It has its uses. My shoes made almost no sound on the floor, and I kept my hands visible, relaxed at my sides, the coat buttoned just enough to hide the keys. The doors along the corridor were closed. Some had small windows, most of them dark. I did not look in. I did not need to. I knew the feeling of being behind one of those doors too well already. At the end of the hall was a larger door marked "Staff Only." It stood ajar. Voices drifted from inside. I stopped before reaching it, leaning slightly against the wall, the way an older woman might when she needs to rest her back. The lawyer's voice was unmistakable. "She's being difficult," he said. "But that's not unusual at her age." Another voice answered, lower, impatient. "We don't have time for this. The transfer needs to be clean." Transfer. Not care. Not safety. Transfer. I pushed away from the wall and turned back before they could see me. I had heard enough. Confirmation has weight. It settles things. The fire alarm sounded without warning. Not the shrill panic kind, but the dull, insistent tone of testing. Doors clicked open along the corridor, one after another. Somewhere farther away, someone swore under their breath. I kept walking. Near the stairwell, the guard was waiting, not blocking my path. Standing beside it, as if he had simply paused there by accident. When he saw me, his eyes flicked briefly to the cameras, then back to my face. "They'll notice soon," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. He nodded once. "Down the stairs. Second floor exit leads to the back lot." "Thank you," I said again. He hesitated, then added, "They'll say you wandered, that you were confused." I looked at him steadily. "Then they'll have to explain the locked door." A flicker of something like respect crossed his face. I took the stairs slowly, my hand on the railing, feeling the cold metal through my palm. Halfway down, my knees complained, but I ignored them. Pain is a familiar companion. It doesn't get to decide for me. The exit door opened easily. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, the kind that clears your head in one breath. The back lot was nearly empty. A delivery van. 2 staff cars. Beyond them, a strip of grass and the fence. I did not run. I walked across the lot, my steps steady, my back straight. When I reached the fence, I heard shouting behind me. My name pronounced wrong. I stopped and turned. The lawyer came first, slightly out of breath, jacket open. Behind him, the woman with the clipboard, her smile gone entirely now. "This is unsafe," the lawyer said. "You need to come back inside." "No," I answered. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly," I said. "You tried to take my home." The woman's face tightened. "That's not how this works." "It is when you get caught," I replied. A security supervisor appeared then, speaking urgently into a radio. The guard stood a few steps behind him, silent. "This doesn't need to escalate," the lawyer said. "Let's just talk." "We will," I agreed, with my lawyer and the state. Silence fell, heavy and sudden. I reached into my coat pocket and took out my keys. I held them up, letting them catch the light. "My house is still mine," I said calmly, "and I am leaving now." No one stopped me. I walked past them, through the gate, and onto the sidewalk beyond. The building loomed behind me, pale and ordinary, already trying to look innocent. I did not look back again. By the time I reached the bus stop, my hands were steady again. That surprised me. I had expected shaking, tears, something theatrical. Instead, there was only a clear, quiet certainty, like the moment after you close a door that should have been closed years ago. I sat on the cold metal bench and waited. The bus was late. They always are when you need them most. I watched cars pass, people inside them absorbed in their own lives, unaware that a small war had just ended a block away. The building was no longer in sight, but I could still feel it behind me, like a bad smell that hadn't quite lifted. When the bus came, the driver barely looked at me. I paid my fare, took a seat near the front, and rested my bag on my lap. Only then did I allow myself to exhale fully. They would not let this go quietly. I knew that. People who attempt something like that rarely accept refusal with grace. There would be calls, explanations, anger disguised as concern. I had stepped out of their control, and they would want it back. My phone was still missing. That was the first thing I would address. At home, the house greeted me the way it always did, with the faint smell of wood and old fabric, and the silence of something that had waited patiently. I locked the door behind me and leaned my forehead against it for a moment, feeling the solidness of it, the truth of it. No one could lock me in here. No one ever had. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same one I had paid off 20 years ago. I spread my keys out in front of me, then the ring, which I slipped off for the first time in days. It left a pale mark on my finger, like proof. I did not sit long. This was not a moment for rest. I walked to the study and opened the drawer, where I keep documents people think I've forgotten about. Deed, will, correspondence. Names and numbers written in my own hand. I took out the card of the attorney who had handled my husband's estate. I had not spoken to him in years, but he would remember me. Men like that always remember women who ask precise questions. I used the landline. The sound of the dial tone felt almost comforting. He answered on the third ring. By the time I hung up, an hour later, my tea had gone cold, and my plan was already forming. He would file inquiries. He would request records. He would be very interested in why I had been held without consent and deprived of my property. That was when the house phone rang again. I did not answer right away. I watched it ring, felt the old instinct to rush toward it, to smooth things over. That instinct had kept me quiet for too long. On the fourth ring, I picked up. My daughter's voice came through, tight and controlled. She did not ask how I was. "Where are you?" she demanded. "At home," I replied, a sharp intake of breath. "You weren't supposed to leave." That told me everything I needed to know. "I wasn't supposed to be locked in a room either," I said evenly. She began to speak quickly then, words tumbling over one another. Misunderstandings, safety, advice she'd been given. How hard it was for her. I listened without interrupting, the way I used to listen when she was a child explaining why something broken wasn't her fault. When she finished, there was silence. "I have hired a lawyer," I said. "You will hear from him." Her voice hardened. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I am reacting appropriately." "You don't understand how these things work." "I do," I replied, "and you will not do them again." She said my name then, the old version of it, the one meant to soften me. It did not work. "This conversation is over," I said, and I hung up. I sat there for a long time afterward, looking at the walls, the floor, the small imperfections I knew by heart. I was tired, but it was a clean kind of tired, the kind that comes after standing your ground. Outside, the light shifted, late afternoon sliding toward evening. The apple tree cast its thin shadow across the porch. I put my ring back on. Whatever came next, I would meet it here, on my own terms. The next few days unfolded quietly, which again told me more than noise ever could. No police, no official letters, just calls I did not answer and messages that grew sharper each time. Concern gave way to irritation. Irritation hardened into threat. People reveal themselves when they stop pretending to be kind. On the second morning after I came home, a courier rang my bell. He was polite, young, and nervous, holding out a thick envelope as if it might bite him. I signed for it without comment and closed the door before he could say anything else. Inside were documents meant to frighten me. Medical evaluations I had never consented to. Statements written in careful language, suggesting confusion, vulnerability, need. Someone had been busy while I was locked in that room. I read every page slowly. Then I laughed, once, softly. They had made a mistake. Several of them, in fact. Dates that didn't line up, names misspelled, a reference to a physician who retired 3 years ago. Sloppiness born of haste, the kind people make when they think the other side won't look too closely. I placed the papers in a neat stack and added them to the growing pile on my table. Evidence does not need drama. It only needs patience. That afternoon, my attorney called back. His voice was different now, sharper, engaged. "You were never legally committed," he said. "Not even temporarily, and withholding your phone is a problem, a serious one." I closed my eyes, just for a moment. "They said my daughter approved it," I replied. "She cannot do that," he said flatly. "Not without a court order, not without evaluation, and certainly not in that manner." We spoke for nearly an hour. He asked questions. I answered them carefully, sticking to facts. Emotion muddies things. Facts are clean. When we finished, he said, "Do not meet with them alone. If they come to the house, do not open the door." "They will?" I said. "Yes," he agreed. "They usually do." That evening, I cooked a proper meal for the first time in days. Nothing fancy. Soup, bread. I ate at my own pace, listening to the house settle around me. A familiar creak in the floorboard near the sink. The soft tick of the old clock in the hallway. Time restored. After dinner, I sat by the window and watched the street. Neighbors passed. A dog barked somewhere. Life continued, indifferent to schemes and signatures. I thought about my daughter then, not with anger, with clarity. I remembered the first time she lied to me as a teenager, standing in this very kitchen, insisting she had been somewhere she hadn't. I had known then, too. I had simply chosen peace over confrontation. That choice had come due. 2 days later, a car I did not recognize parked across the street. It stayed there longer than necessary. When the woman inside finally got out, she wore a blazer and carried a folder. Always the folders. She rang the bell once, then again. I did not move. From my chair, I watched her through the lace curtain as she checked her phone, sighed, and scribbled something on a pad. After a while, she returned to her car and left. I smiled, just slightly. They were still operating under the assumption that I would fold. That age equals compliance. That time would wear me down. They did not understand something fundamental. I have lived long enough to know that dignity, once reclaimed, is not negotiable. And I had no intention of surrendering it again. On the 5th day, the guard came to my house, not in uniform. That more than anything else, made me open the door. He stood on the porch with his hands visible, empty, as if he knew exactly what gestures mattered to someone like me. He wore jeans, a dark jacket, nothing that would mark him as authority. Just a man standing where he did not strictly belong. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," he said. I didn't know another way. "You found one," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." He hesitated for half a second, then entered, looking around with the quiet attention of someone who understands rooms. He noticed the apple tree through the window, the framed photo of my husband near the hallway, the way the furniture was placed not for style, but for living. "They sent me," he said carefully. "Not officially. More like suggested. To check on me," I finished. "Yes." I gestured toward the kitchen table. "Sit." He did. He did not reach for anything. He waited. "They're nervous," he continued. "The inquiry from your lawyer spooked them. Inspectors have been asking questions. Paper trails they assumed no one would follow." "And you?" I asked. "Why are you here?" He looked down at his hands, then back up. "Because I've seen this before, and because of the ring." I poured tea for both of us. My hands did not shake. "My grandfather lost everything," he said quietly. "Not because he was incapable, because someone decided it was easier that way." I set the cup in front of him. "People often confuse convenience with justice." He nodded. "They're trying to reframe it now. Say you left against advice, that they were concerned." "They always are," I said. "They want you to sign something," he added. "A statement, just to close the file." I smiled, not warmly. "No," I said. "They want me to erase their mistake." He exhaled slowly. "Yes." We sat in silence for a moment. The clock ticked. Outside, a car passed. "I can't testify against them," he said finally. "Not directly." "I wouldn't ask you to," I replied. "But," he continued, "I can tell you this. The room you were held in isn't licensed for overnight stays. It's designated for short assessments only. No locks, no isolation." I looked at him steadily. "That's important." "Yes," he said. "It is." He stood then, clearly uncomfortable with staying longer. "They'll try one more time," he said. "Soon, with softer language, maybe even apologies." "They always save those for last," I replied. At the door he paused. "I meant what I said," he added. "You weren't meant to stay." "I know," I said. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it for a moment, feeling the quiet settle again. I did not feel triumphant. I felt resolved. That afternoon, my daughter called once more. This time, her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. "We need to talk," she said. "We already have," I replied. "This has gone too far." "Yes," I said. "It has." She tried a different approach then. Tears, regret, memory. She spoke of my husband, of how hard things had been for her, of fear. I listened. I always listen. When she finished, I said only this: "You tried to remove my voice. You don't get to borrow it now." She was quiet after that. The call ended without agreement, without closure. I went outside as the sun lowered, stood beneath the apple tree, and rested my hand against its thin trunk. It was older now, bark rougher, roots deeper. It had survived storms that looked worse than they were, and others that arrived without warning. So had I. Whatever they planned next, I knew this much for certain: they were no longer in control of the story. They came the next morning, just as the guard predicted. Not together this time. That too was deliberate. First my daughter, alone, parked crookedly at the curb as if she had rushed. Then, an hour later, the lawyer would arrive, carrying authority like a shield. Divide, soften, then finish. I recognized the pattern. I had used it myself once, long ago, negotiating contracts when my husband was still alive. I opened the door to my daughter but did not invite her in. She stood there with her coat half-buttoned, hair pulled back too tightly, eyes red but alert. Not grief. Calculation. She looked past me into the house, as if checking what still belonged to me. "Can we talk?" she asked. "We are talking," I said. She swallowed. "Not like this." "This is how you chose," I replied. She stepped inside anyway, brushing past me with the confidence of someone who believed she still had rights here. I did not stop her. Stopping her would have been emotional. I needed her comfortable. She sat at the table and folded her hands. "You scared me," she said softly. "You could have gotten hurt." "I did get hurt," I answered. "You arranged it." Her eyes flashed. "That's not fair." "Fairness has nothing to do with it," I said. "Intent does." She leaned forward. "I was trying to protect you. You don't see how vulnerable you've become." I poured myself coffee and sat across from her. "You locked me in a room." She flinched, just slightly. "That wasn't my idea." "But you signed," I said. Silence stretched. Then she tried again, her voice gentler now. "The house is a burden, you know that. Maintenance, taxes. It's too much for you alone." "I've managed it for 20 years," I replied, "including the years I managed you." She stood abruptly. Anger, now. "Why are you doing this? Making things difficult?" I looked up at her. "Because you tried to make me disappear." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had no prepared response. The doorbell rang. Perfect timing. The lawyer entered moments later, nodding to me as if we were old acquaintances. He placed his folder on the table without asking. "We'd like to resolve this amicably," he said. "Leave," I replied. My daughter stared at me. The lawyer hesitated. "Mrs. I said leave," I repeated. "Both of you. My attorney will contact you." He cleared his throat. "That won't be necessary if you're willing to reconsider." I slid a document across the table. Just one page. He stopped talking. It was the inspection notice, the preliminary findings, the designation of the room, the absence of consent, the potential violations highlighted in neat yellow. My daughter's face drained of color. "You knew?" she whispered. "I paid attention," I said. The lawyer closed his folder slowly. "We'll be in touch," he said, his voice tighter now. "No," I replied. "You won't." They left without another word. After the door closed, I sat alone at the table, listening to the house breathe. My hands trembled then, finally, not from fear, from release. I stood and went to the study, opening the drawer once more. I took out my will and placed it on the desk. Then I called my attorney and asked for an amendment. That afternoon, I walked through every room of my house slowly, deliberately. I touched the door frames, the shelves, the place on the wall where my husband once measured our daughter's height with pencil marks she tried to erase when she was older. I was not preparing to leave. I was preparing to stay on my own terms. By the time the letter arrived, I had already stopped waiting for it. It came by certified mail, thick envelope, official seal. They wanted me to feel the weight of it before I even opened it. I let it sit on the hall table for a full day, passing it each time without touching it. Power loses some of its shine when you refuse to rush. When I finally opened it, the language was careful, almost apologetic. An administrative misunderstanding, a temporary lapse in procedure. No admission of intent, no acknowledgement of harm, just an invitation to resolve matters privately, quietly, with dignity. Dignity, offered only after they failed to take it. They proposed a meeting, neutral location, mediator present. My daughter named specifically, as if her presence were a concession. I folded the letter and placed it with the others. That afternoon, my attorney came to the house. He walked through the rooms slowly, not because he needed to, but because he understood what it meant. Men like him know that homes tell stories. Documents never can. He paused at the kitchen doorway, looking at the old table, the worn chair where my husband used to sit. They were confident, he said finally. Too confident. They always are, I replied, until someone says no. He laid out his findings without drama. Violations, conflicts of interest, false statements made in anticipation of compliance. Nothing explosive on its own, but together they formed a pattern. Courts notice patterns. They're trying to contain it now, he said, before it becomes public. And my daughter? I asked. He hesitated. She signed more than she claims. I nodded. That hurt less than I expected. By the time truth arrives, grief is often already done. That evening I called my granddaughter. She answered on the first ring, breathless, as if she'd been waiting. Grandma, she said, I tried to tell them. I know, I said gently. You don't have to carry this. She was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? Yes, I replied. I am. And I meant it. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. I agreed to attend, on one condition. My attorney would speak for me. They accepted immediately. Another sign of urgency. In the days before it, I slept well, better than I had in years. There is something restful about alignment, when your thoughts, your actions, and your silence finally agree with one another. The night before the meeting, my daughter left a voicemail. Not angry this time. Not pleading either. Tired. Small. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. I thought you'd understand. I deleted the message. Understanding is not the same as excusing. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Not formally, just well. The blue cardigan my husband liked. The ring on my hand where it belonged. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw no apology there. Whatever happened next, I would not be reduced again. Not by paperwork. Not by fear. Not by family who mistook access for ownership. I locked the door behind me and stepped into the day, steady and unhurried, carrying nothing I was willing to lose. The mediation room was smaller than I expected. Neutral locations often are. Beige walls, a table too polished, water pitchers placed like symbols of good faith. The kind of room designed to make everything said inside it feel reasonable, even when it isn't. My attorney arrived with me and took the seat to my left. Across the table sat the mediator, a woman with calm eyes and practiced neutrality. My daughter came in last, followed by the lawyer I already knew too well. He avoided my gaze this time. No one offered apologies at first. They never do. Apologies come only after leverage is gone. The mediator began with her script. Purpose, process, mutual respect. I listened politely, hands folded, ring catching the light when I moved. I had learned long ago that silence unsettles people more than protest. My attorney spoke first. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He simply laid out facts, one after another, each placed carefully, like stones in a line. Unlawful confinement. Lack of consent. Withholding of personal property. Misrepresentation of medical status. Conflict of interest between family members and legal counsel. The mediator's pen slowed. The lawyer across from us stopped taking notes. When my attorney finished, the room was very quiet. That's a serious interpretation, the other lawyer said at last. It's not an interpretation, my attorney replied. It's documented. The mediator looked at me then. Mrs. Hale, she said gently, using my married name with care. Is there anything you'd like to add? I lifted my eyes to hers. Only that I was locked in a room, I said, and that my daughter signed the papers. My daughter inhaled sharply. I didn't know they'd locked the door, she said quickly. I was told it was temporary, just for evaluation. You were told, I repeated, and you didn't ask. She looked at the table. I was scared. So was I said quietly. But only one of us lost their freedom. The mediator shifted in her seat. This was no longer abstract. The other lawyer cleared his throat. Our clients are prepared to offer a resolution, he said, an apology, a written assurance, and a transition plan that ensures Mrs. Hale's safety going forward. My attorney didn't answer immediately. He looked at me instead. No, I said. The word landed cleanly, final. The mediator blinked. You're declining mediation? I'm declining to pretend this was a misunderstanding, I replied. You tried to take my home. You failed. Now you want quiet. Silence again. What do you want? The mediator asked. I considered the question carefully, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to choose the words that would not be misunderstood. I want my daughter removed from any legal authority over me, I said. Immediately and permanently. I want written acknowledgement that I was unlawfully confined. And I want assurance that this facility will be investigated. The other lawyer's face tightened. That opens us up to... Yes, I said. It does. My daughter looked at me then. Really looked, as if seeing me for the first time in years. There was no anger in her face now, just something like fear. You'd do that to me? She asked softly. I met her gaze. You already did it to me. The mediator closed her folder. We'll need a recess, she said. They stepped out, all except me and my attorney. You're certain? He asked quietly. I've never been more certain of anything, I replied. When they returned, the tone had changed. They agreed. Not happily, not graciously, but completely. Documents were signed, authority revoked, statements drafted, investigations acknowledged. The room felt heavier with each pen stroke, like truth settling into place. When it was over, my daughter stood uncertainly, as if expecting something more. I gathered my coat. This doesn't mean I don't love you, she said quickly. I paused at the door. Love does not require control, I replied. Remember that. Outside, the air was cool and bright. I took a deep breath, feeling it fill my lungs all the way down. For the first time since the lock turned on that door, I felt truly free again. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They never do. They came quietly, in envelopes and phone calls, in cautious pauses and softened voices. Institutions correct themselves slowly, like large bodies turning in water. But they do turn. Within a week, an investigator contacted my attorney. Within 2, the facility suspended admissions pending review. By the 3rd, the woman with the clipboard no longer worked there. I did not celebrate that. Systems don't fail because of one person. They fail because many people decide not to look too closely. My daughter stopped calling. That was harder than I expected, though I won't pretend it surprised me. Silence from a child is a particular sound. It echoes differently. I learned to live with it the same way I learned to live with the absence of my husband, by not pretending it was temporary. One afternoon, I found my phone in the mailbox. No note, no explanation. Just the device, wrapped once in brown paper, as if returning a library book. I held it for a long moment before turning it on. Messages flooded in, old ones, panicked ones, angry ones. I deleted them all without listening. The past does not need to be replayed to be acknowledged. There was one message I kept. From my granddaughter. Simple. I'm proud of you. That was enough. The guard came by once more, weeks later. Not to the house this time. I ran into him at the market, both of us reaching for the same loaf of bread. He smiled when he recognized me, tentative, respectful. They reassigned me, he said. Different place. I hope it's better, I replied. It is, he said. Then, after a pause, they won't do that again. Not like that. I nodded. They always find another way. He looked at me thoughtfully. You stopped them this time. I considered that as I walked home. Not the stopping, the standing. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun went down, watching the light fade across the street. The apple tree moved slightly in the breeze, leaves whispering like old paper. I thought about the woman I had been in that locked room, counting footsteps, measuring silence. She had not been weak. She had been patient. People misunderstand patience. They think it means waiting for rescue. It doesn't. It means waiting for the right moment to act. I amended my will again that week. Carefully. Deliberately. Not out of spite, but clarity. Love that costs your dignity is not love. It is debt. When the papers were finalized, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not relieved. Finished. On the last warm evening of the month, I cooked dinner for myself and ate by the window. No ceremony, just nourishment. Afterward, I washed the dishes and stood looking at my reflection in the glass. An older woman. Lines where laughter and sorrow had both passed through. Someone who had learned, late but thoroughly, the value of her own voice. They locked me in a room to take my home. They failed. Not because I was loud, not because I fought, but because I remembered who I was before anyone tried to tell me otherwise. The house felt different after that, though nothing in it had changed. Same walls, same floorboards that complained in winter, same kitchen drawer that stuck unless you lifted it just right. But the air moved more freely, as if something tight had been loosened and never pulled back again. I stopped jumping at the phone. I stopped listening for footsteps that weren't there. My sleep settled into a deeper rhythm, the kind that belongs to people who are no longer bracing for impact. One morning, I drove to the edge of town without a particular reason. I hadn't been there in years. The road narrowed, the houses thinned, and the river appeared the way it always had, unimpressed by human arrangements. I parked and sat in the car for a while, hands resting on the steering wheel, thinking about how many decisions in my life had been made quietly, without witnesses. Strength is often like that. It doesn't announce itself. At the riverbank, I walked slowly, careful with my knees, letting the sound of water replace the constant measuring I'd been doing for so long. No calculations. No anticipation. Just movement forward and the knowledge that I could stop whenever I wanted. I thought about my daughter again, but differently this time. Not as someone who had wronged me, but as someone who had chosen a shortcut and paid for it. We all do, eventually. Some costs arrive sooner than others. I did not feel the urge to forgive. Forgiveness is not a requirement for peace. Understanding is enough, and even that has limits. Back home, I opened the windows and let the afternoon in. Dust lifted and settled. The apple tree tapped lightly against the porch rail, the way it had for years. I realized then that I had been living as if the house might be taken from me at any moment, even before anyone tried. Shrinking, just a little. Preparing, just in case. I stopped doing that. I fixed small things I'd been putting off. Tightened a loose hinge. Replaced a bulb. Called a roofer and scheduled an inspection without explaining myself to anyone. Each task was ordinary. Together, They felt like a declaration. My granddaughter visited on a Sunday, bringing bread she had baked herself. We sat at the table and talked about nothing important. School, weather, a book she was reading. She did not ask questions. She did not need to. Her presence said what words could not. Before she left, she hugged me longer than usual. "You're different," she said. "So are you," I replied. That night, I took out the ring and cleaned it carefully, tracing the worn engraving with my thumb. It had passed through more hands than I ever would. It had survived wars, loss, patience, and men who believed ownership could be transferred quietly. I slipped it back on. The world did not change after that. It rarely does. But my place in it did. I no longer felt like something that needed managing, explaining, or correcting. I was simply a woman in her 70s, standing in her own kitchen, in her own house, with her own name intact. And that was enough. I did not wake up that morning thinking about victory. At my age, you learn that victories announced too loudly rarely last. What lasts is something quieter. The return of balance. The feeling that nothing is pressing on your chest when you open your eyes. I made coffee and stood at the sink, watching steam rise, listening to the house do what it has always done. The refrigerator hummed. The clock marked time without urgency. No one was coming. No one was waiting for me to fail. That was the real ending. Not the meeting. Not the signatures. Not even the investigation. The ending was this ordinary morning, where my life belonged to me again without explanation. People think stories like mine end with apologies, with reconciliations, with someone knocking on the door, finally understanding. Sometimes they do. Most of the time, they don't. My daughter never came back. Not to argue, not to cry, not to ask forgiveness. I suspect she tells herself a story where I am stubborn, unreasonable, difficult. That is easier than admitting she tried to erase me for convenience. We all choose the stories we can live with. I chose a different one. I chose to live as a woman who does not need permission to take up space. In the weeks that followed, small things continued to change. I received a formal letter acknowledging the violation of my rights. I received another confirming the investigation's findings. I filed them away without ceremony. Paper has its place. It is not the place of meaning. Meaning came in other forms, in walking through my neighborhood without that faint sense of being watched, in answering the phone without rehearsing what I might say, in sleeping through the night without bracing for interruption. Once, at the grocery store, a woman about my age struggled to reach something on a high shelf. I helped her. She smiled and said, "They forget we're still here, don't they?" "Yes," I said, "they do." And we laughed. Not bitterly, not loudly. Just enough. I think often about that room they locked me in, about how quickly a life can be reduced to a checklist if no one objects, about how many women never get the chance to say no loudly enough, clearly enough, soon enough. Age makes you visible in strange ways. People see your body, your slowness, your limitations. They forget to see your history, your judgment. Your right to decide what happens next. I have learned this, and I say it without anger. If someone needs you silent in order to take what is yours, they already know they are wrong. I am not extraordinary. I did not win because of money or power or connections. I won because I paid attention, because I did not rush, because I remembered that dignity is not granted by family or institutions. It is claimed. If you are reading this and something in it feels familiar, if you have been spoken over, managed, dismissed, or quietly pushed aside, know this. It is not too late to draw a line. It is not selfish to protect what you built. And you are not difficult for refusing to disappear politely. If this story stayed with you, if it stirred something you haven't named yet, don't ignore that feeling. Share it. Speak about it. Let it remind other women that silence is not the same as peace, and that even late in life, your voice still carries weight.